Hello everyone! Welcome back to Void Dwarf Studios, where she'll be looking at part 3 of Space Marines, exploring the complex and age-old question of what is a Space Marine? Or at least, the components that make up a Space Marine is way more complicated than you might assume. So, in this video, because if the last one taught me anything, it's that it's too massive a subject to try and talk about in one go, I'm going to be talking about the Space Marine Warrior and the various positions that they fulfill within the chapter. And a lot of this does apply to legions as well. I will specifically say when it doesn't. So, we're going to start off with the basics. We'll start off with where does our Space Marine start, where can they end up in terms of progression, and what their battlefield role is. So, starting at the bottom, we have our recently recruited Scout, or Neophyte, depending on what chapter you're in. And a quick thing I should also mention, the Space Marines we're going to look at are Codex-compliant chapters. Simply because if I start going into the other Space Marine chapters that don't follow the Codex, then this could get a bit complicated. Also, I feel that they deserve their own video in their own right. You know, Space Wolves, Black Templars, Dark Angels, that kind of thing. So, we have our Scout. He has most of his organs implanted. He is nearly a fully fledged Space Marine. Scouts will fulfill reconnaissance duties. They will be going behind enemy lines. They'll be learning from senior Scouts, who are often Space Marines who have chosen to remain in Scout companies. And it's their job to go behind enemy lines, gather information, cause trouble, set up explosives, that kind of thing. Relatively straightforward work. They can be kitted out in multiple ways. Some are with bolt pistols and knives for close quarters guerrilla warfare. Some are snipers for your long-range killing. In fact, most Space Marine chapters prefer to give their scouts sniper rifles as opposed to getting up close and personal, as, well, it takes a long time to make a Space Marine, and a lot of chapters feel that to waste them in close combat is very irresponsible. You can also have variations of scouts who are in land speeders or bikes to give them extra maneuverability, and this just allows them to get out of dodge quicker with a little bit of heavy firepower. So once our Scout has finished his time in the 10th Company, he will become a Space Marine. And typically speaking, they will always become Tactical Marines first. And a Tactical Marine is armed with a bolt gun, the most iconic weapon of the Space Marine, next to the chainsword. So a Tactical Marine's role is, well, tactical. It's all laid out in the Codex Astartes. It's very tactical. Their job is to be the front line. So if your scouts are going behind enemy lines, causing disruption, gathering info, your tactical squads will be doing the bulk of the fighting. So just like in the Horus Heresy, the tactical squad is the main battle line troop. They can fulfill a number of roles because, tactical marines, kind of in the name. And what you can use them for is, well, you can use them to defend objectives, you can use them to assault objectives, you can use them for urban warfare, you can use them for jungle warfare, They are very, very flexible. And as I said, the Space Marine will be armed with the bolt gun, which is fantastic for piercing almost everything. You've got to start thinking about some serious heavy armor to stop a bolt gun to the head. But they'll also have a sidearm, bolt pistol, and a knife, just in case. The sergeant will more often than not be given a chain sword for that extra close combat-y goodness. Because in 40k, if you're a sergeant or leader in a particular squad, it is your job to kill the biggest, nastiest thing that you're going to fight. And if you want to get them from point A to point B quickly, with a relatively decent amount of protection, shove this squad of 10 to 5 dudes, I should say, in a Rhino or Razorback, and, well, you've got a pretty effective mobile force there. Rhinos are the workhorse of the Space Marine chapters, and they are the workhorse for a reason. These things are pretty tough. Don't get me wrong, a decent heavy weapon will stop this thing, but in terms of its ruggedness and versatility, the Rhino is a perfect chassis for moving your tactical squads around. Or, if subtlety is not something you particularly care for, stick your tactical squads in drop pods and then throw them down onto your enemy's fortifications and watch as the unfortunate people below get Space Marines screaming into their faces. In addition to this, Tactical Marines always get the option of a heavy or special weapon. This can be the form of a missile launcher, las cannon, multi-melters, and special weapons tend to be melter guns, flamers, and plasma. All of these options mean that a tactical squad is actually more capable than it may appear. The bolt gun is fantastic for most things, and when you combine that by giving them a heavy weapon and a specialist weapon, you can kit them out to take on multiple different kinds of opponents. If you know you're going to be dealing with lots of armor, give your tactical squad a melter gun and say a las cannon or a multi-melter or plasma, and you'll be able to take out most heavy vehicles and monsters without much difficulty. If you're fighting, say, Tyranids, you know you're going to have to fight hordes of gribbling monsters, then you could take a flamethrower as your specialist weapon. And you could maybe take a plasma cannon, because then you have a blast weapon that can take out multiple things at once. This is why the tactical squad is the battle line for all chapters. Unless you're a fully Primaris chapter, but we'll get into that later. Afterwards, your tactical marine has one of many choices, depending upon the recommendations of their sergeant. They can choose to become an assault marine, in which case they tend to be given a jump pack, and they sacrifice their bolt gun for a bolt pistol and chainsword, or a specialist weapon, such as a power sword, thunderhammer, an eviscerator, lightning claws, all kinds of fun things, and this will make them more close combat centric. So, building on this, you've got your scouts causing trouble behind enemy lines, your tactical squads holding the line. You then have the assault companies whose job it is to take down bunkers, to remove large targets, and to destroy gribblies. And the assault marines can also be given specialist weapons. For example, a fun thing I used to do was having a group of 10 assault marines with 2 flamethrowers. This tended to make mincemeat of any horde units, so it was very handy. You can also give your assault marines plasma pistols, or plasma guns, or melter guns. No matter what target, the assault marine is almost as flexible as a tactical squad, minus the heavy weapon. So that's not surprising why a lot of chapters do use assault marines in quite large numbers, particularly Blood Angels. And in terms of deployment, well, the jump pack means that they can more or less jump from low orbit, but more often than not, you can also deploy them via Thunderhawk dropships, Storm Ravens, and any other kind of aerial support where they can just leap out, jump onto the enemy's position, and cause all kinds of mischief. Having a 10-man assault squad in the middle of your force, say if you're a traitor guardsman regiment, is going to be hell, and trying to extract that unit, or even trying to put up a fight against assault marines, is nigh on impossible. Whilst a guardsman might have a chance with big enough gun, if Space Marines are far enough distance, in close quarters melee, Space Marines just have all the advantages. And if you particularly enjoy speed, but you're not really that keen on flying through the air, there is always bikes. Space Marines have 2 variations. They have the basic bike, which is armed with a twin-link bolt gun, and whatever other gun you particularly feel like carrying at the time. Typically a bolt pistol, but squads can have, say, a plasma or melter, and an attack bike, which comes with a heavy weapon, usually a heavy bolter or a multi-melter. Bikes aren't often deployed en masse. They tend to be used for hit-and-run raids, or for lightning assaults, unless you're the White Scars, in which case you make use of bikes heavily in your various tactics. But a bike operates in a fairly similar manner to an assault marine, the main difference being that whilst a jump pack marine slams into the unit that they've just flown over the heads of and carved them up with chainswords, the bikes just ride over them, and then just turn around and start shooting and ride over them again. And then just keep riding over them until they have to retreat, or they squashed everything under their tyres. And then, of course, there is the opposite end of the spectrum, where you have the Devastator Squad. These are Space Marines who have decided they like big guns, and they cannot lie. So, a Devastator Squad basically stands back, aims, fires. And depending upon what weaponry you arm them with, depends on what they're going to be used for. They're actually very flexible, and you'll find that about almost all the Space Marine units in the 41st millennium. They are flexible. They have to be. Unlike the Horus Heresy, where there are multiple units that are specifically for specific tasks and specific roles, minus the Tactical Marine, the 41st millennium Space Marine cannot afford to not have some degree of flexibility, and that was what Guilliman recognised when he broke them up into 1,000-strong chapters. So a Devastator squad, depending on what it's facing, will change its armament as necessary. If they know they're going to be fighting hordes of Gripplis, then they take heavy bolters or plasma cannons. If they know they're going up against some really heavy armor, they can take las cannons and multi-melters or plasma cannons. Just be careful with those plasma cannons, though. They, as I've mentioned previously, the Imperium plasma technology is a little bit temperamental sometimes. Personally, I've always stuck with a las cannon and a multi-melter if I have to have Devastators. But I don't tend to use Devastators because I'm a Black Templar and standing back and shooting at things is for wusses. Wusses and Tau. I'm kidding, of course. Mostly. Or grav cannons, which I've forgotten to mention, so I'll just quickly put it in here. It comes in a couple of variations. You have a grav gun, grav pistol, grav cannon. Basically, it's a gun that screws around with gravity. You fire it at your target, it increases the weight of gravity around them, basically crushing them. So it's really good against heavy armor or vehicles. So now we've kind of got most of the core elements of a Space Marine chapter together, and what are deployed in battle companies. You have your scout company, as I've said, causing mischief behind enemy lines. You have your tactical marine, who holds the front line. You have your assault marines, who take over key objectives and get into close quarters combat ASAP. And then you have your devastators, who lay down heavy fire support. And thanks to the lovely Vox communicators inside of all Space Marine helmets, they can communicate with each other with relative ease, so long as there's no jamming equipment installed nearby. Before we move on to the First Company veterans, which is where your Space Marine will head, a quick side note. During the Age of Apostasy, a time period which I will get into in a separate video, essentially it was a religious civil war within the Imperium. Well, more complicated than that, but I'll get into it. The Imperium decided it needed a new kind of Space Marine warsuit, an exosuit. Something much more brutal, upfront, and devastating. So they created the Centurion, based on an ancient STC that the Mechanicus, found somewhere. This is one of those things that GW kind of threw in a while back into the mix before the Primaris turned up. If you thought Primaris were contentious, when these things turned up, they made a couple fans scratch their heads in confusion, because they were talked about as though they'd always had them, which isn't really the case. And the story goes is that they were created during the Age of Apostasy, but didn't see action until later on in the Imperium because of wanting to make sure that these STCs were, stable, secure, reliable constructs. And what they are is, it is a large exosuit. So it's essentially like a Space Marine stepping into an Iron Man suit, or like a small mech suit is probably a better description. And they come in two variations. One you can take with las cannons, plasma cannons, or with various heavy bolters, graviton cannons, and a gravamp, which just makes them even more powerful. And the other you can take with what are called siege drills, which are truly horrific fortification breaking tools. These guys tend to be deployed for very specialist purposes, more often than not to, bust down the door, or offer more mobile heavy fire support. These things are as tough as a Terminator, although they do lack the invulnerable save that they can gain from the Crux Terminatus. But they make up for that by being really tough, relatively maneuverable, and also relatively easy to deploy. I mean, it will take a Land Raider or a Storm Raven or Thunderhawk dropship to bring these in. There's no way you're fitting any of these in a Rhino or Razorback, but you can deploy them with relative ease. You send out your tactical squads. You have a couple squads, maybe one or two squads of these, where the thickest fighting is going to be. And you'll have the heavy weapon team ones supporting your tactical squads closer to the fighting, or you'll have your assault variant that will be there to, open any door that thinks a lock will stop it. Because those siege drills are absolutely horrific, and if a normal human gets caught in one of those, so much jam everywhere. After a certain number of years, typically hundreds of years in service, a Space Marine may be elevated to the First Company. And when in the First Company, they get to make some choices. Now, they could become an honor guard, which is a close combat variant. Essentially, they're for protecting their chapter master from anything particularly grisly. But to become one of the honor guard, you'll have to have done something quite exceptional, and almost always in personal combat. Typically speaking, you start with one of two places in the first company, is into the Stern Guard or Vanguard Veterans. These are, well, specialists in their given field. Whilst an Assault Marine was a Tactical Marine and has many years of Tactical Marine experience behind them to make them versatile in an assault situation, a Vanguard Veteran, for example, is specialised in the assault for hundreds of years, perfectly finding out the best ways to kill its opponent in close combat and the correct tool for the job. If you're a Stern Guard Veteran, you like guns, and you like as many guns as possible in as different varieties as possible. This is often why the Stern Guard have what are called combi weapons. A bolt gun with a underslung component, typically a plasma gun, a flamer, or a melter, allowing a Stern Guard squad to be even more flexible in terms of firepower than a tactical squad, allowing them to be very capable at taking on multiple targets. And if you're a Vanguard, then you are very capable of taking on multiple kinds of foes in close combat. The Sergeant tends to be given a relic blade, a huge power sword capable of slicing through practically anything and everything, or you can have lightning claws, thunder hammers, power fists, or you can have your chainsword bolt pistol. And to give yourself a little extra protection, you can take storm shields, allowing you to be far more tough than your average Space Marine. As whilst ceramite armor is amazing, there are still many races and creatures in the galaxy that can pierce it. And it only takes one lucky shot. Oh, and you get access to all kinds of fun pistols too, like grav pistols, plasma, even flame pistols depending on the chapter. These guys are specialists in their given field, and because of this they are typically deployed in very small numbers. Right, now we start to get into the real meat of a Space Marine chapter, and war gear that just keeps getting rarer the higher up we go. So now we're going to look at Terminators. Terminators. I haven't gone through the various patterns of Terminator armor, which I figure I might have to do in a separate video, but suffice to say, Terminator armor is the best armor a Space Marine can find, unless he's a Primaris, but we'll get to them later. So a Terminator armor is also known as Tactical Dreadnought armor. It was created near the end of the Heresy because it became believed that the Tactical Marine would become a bit superfluous once this was deployed en masse. Although, since the Horus Heresy, and, well, because of the Horus Heresy, Space Marines found that if you're fighting another Space Marine whilst wearing Tactical Dreadnought armor, and they're just in normal power armor, the Terminator was at a severe disadvantage, just because the skills used to operate one of these suits is different from the power armor of an average Space Marine. It is so much slower, so much heavier, and it's harder to fight more fluidly in this suit. It takes a lot of training, and a lot of chapters don't have that many Terminator suits. And those they have, a lot of them are very difficult to repair because the knowledge of how to make them is getting rarer and rarer. Although maybe with Guilliman back and the Imperium starting to innovate a bit, this might no longer be the case. But as far as we know, Terminator armor is still very rare and very difficult to make. And Terminators come, typically speaking, in two flavors. You have what I like to call the Tactical Terminator suit. This squad tends to have a captain with a power sword and some kind of Stormbolter or specialist pistol. And the other Terminators are armed with a power fist and a Stormbolter, with a specialist who tends to be given either a Cyclone missile launcher or an assault cannon or a heavy flamer. If Vanguard and Stern Guard veterans are used in small numbers, maybe a couple squads at most, typically speaking, you will have one Terminator squad. Only one. Why? Because these guys are so goddamn rare. Your Terminators are there for a specific job and should not be involved in anything else. Hell, just to get them from point A to point B, you have two choices. You either stick them in a Storm Raven, a Land Raider, or teleport. They're one of the few units that can actually perform a teleportarum assault. So your Terminators will be going for the toughest target, typically speaking the leader of the enemy forces. And they are fantastic for close quarters, tight, confined fighting. Because you don't really need to aim when you have a Storm Bolter, or an Assault Cannon, or a Heavy Flamer. You just sort of point it, and anything in that general direction is going to explode in guts and gore. And anything you slap with a Power Fist is going to be so much sticky meat on the wall. Terminators are perfect for Space Hulks, close quarters fighting, and especially in restrained and restricted spaces. That is where a Terminator excels, because you can't get past it, it's too big, too heavy, and you're not going to be able to get it out of your way. You've got to go through it, and that's exactly what a Terminator wants to do. The other variant is my personal favourite, the Assault Terminator Squad. These guys are armed with Thunderhammer Storm Shields or Lightning Claws. And they make so much jam of almost anything they encounter. Lightning Claws, perfect for killing hordes of enemies. Thunderhammer Storm Shields for making anything that thinks it has a chance of surviving a Lightning Claw severely regret being in close proximity to the Terminator. Because of the rarity of these suits, if a Space Marine is given the honour of using it, it is one of the highest honours they can have. And typically speaking, a chapter can maybe have a squad of Terminators in the galaxy at any one time. A squad. That is how rare this stuff is. Some chapters have more, but the average chapter may be a squad of Terminators, if it's lucky and influential and has the help of the Inquisition and Mechanicum. So, long odds. But Terminator armor, when deployed properly, is incredibly effective. At this point, our Space Marine could very well become a captain or a lieutenant and be placed in command of a particular battle company. And after that, well, really the sky's the limit. With enough time, patience, and bloody-minded violence, your humble scout could become a chapter master. Although this is a process that's probably going to take, at the very least, a couple 100 years, and that's if a chapter's in constant fighting, as well as the first company being in constant warfare, which is rarer than you might think, especially on Mars. Now we need to talk about the Primaris question, and how they fit into chapters, because some chapters have assimilated them better than others. Some of them have either just straight up turned Space Marines into Primaris, so they already had their previous skills through the tactical squads, or they train them up from scratch and ignore the Space Marine level, I want to say, completely and become straight up Primaris Marines. So the organisation is a little bit different and not necessarily complicated, but a different path, you might say, a different kind of utility. So to start off with, we're going to look at the Primaris Intercessor and its new variant that's coming out soon, which is the Assault Intercessor. I mean, it is relatively straightforward, honestly. The Assault Intercessor is a close combat variant, chainsword, bolt pistol, possibly a sergeant with a specialist weapon. We're waiting to find that out. And the Intercessor with the bolt rifle is more or less, I can't say it's doing the same job as a tactical squad. Why? Because a tactical squad has the flexibility of a heavy weapon and specialist weapon,
such as a melter, plasma, flamethrower, you get the idea.
Whilst an Intercessor squad lacks these qualities,
meaning that they are more limited on the kinds of foes they can take on.
They make a very solid gun line. The bolt rifle is a better bolt gun, so they are better at taking on more opponents, and they are tougher, so they can take longer to go down. But because of the lack of utility, at least for now, this might change in 9th edition, this means that Primaris Marines are more often than not
very task-orientated. Unlike their older Space Marine cousins, who are tactical for the sake of it, meaning that they have to be able to at least take on multiple kinds of foes, a Primaris Marine has a very set task. The intercessor stays still and shoots as a solid gun line. The assault ones, well, assault. And then the heavier ones take on heavier targets.
The intercessors for both the tactical and assault variant basically being there to take up wounds, soak up damage, and keep an enemy placed in one position. However, what gets more interesting is when we start looking at the incursors, aggressors, inceptors,
or one of the many new Primaris Space Marines, the Vanguard, who include units such as the Eliminators, Infiltrators, Suppressors,
and Radicators. This is where Primaris starts getting more interesting. It's all mostly based around the fact that the Mark X power armor that all these Space Marines wear is modular, meaning that it can be equipped with various different upgrades.
So if you are a Vanguard Infiltrator, clad in your wonderful Mark X Phobos armor, you are there for disrupting enemy communications and sabotaging targets. You differ from Scouts in that you have more sensitive equipment to allow you to communicate better over longer distances, as well as having access to various types of smoke grenades and a much more powerful bolt gun, allowing Primaris Marine chapters to have a form of reconnaissance. If you're an Incursor squad, then this is your behind enemy lines Space Marine more geared up towards close combat. As well as being excellent rear guards, because of their sensitive equipment, it allows them to detect incoming transports, teleports, drop pods. It gives you that little extra heads up. The other thing that I feel is very important to note is the fact that when you're a Space Marine in a Primaris chapter, your armor is always going to be really good, because you are always in power armor. There's no Scout armor for you. You will always be in some form of Mark X power armor, meaning that Primaris chapters are very hardy and very tough, and it also tends to mean that their aspirants, neophytes or trainees have a slightly better chance of surviving. In the case of the Reavers, who are much like Scouts in that they are for disrupting enemy lines, these guys are more geared towards close combat, and their tactics are more geared towards terror tactics. They're not necessarily there to kill you. They are there to scare the living crap out of you until you decide to run. Whilst there are certain chapters who find these sorts of terror tactics distasteful, it can't be denied that they are highly effective. And being able to infiltrate via grav chutes means that they can drop in more silently than their jump-packing cousins. But now we should probably get on to some bigger guns, because we've gone over the various starting points for a Primaris Marine. Let's go into something a bit heavier. The Inceptors are the Primaris Marine answer to the Assault Jump Pack Marine. Armed in the Mark X Gravis armor, essentially a much heavier, bulkier armor for greater protection, they are dropped from low orbit and essentially they are there to just pour fire down upon the unfortunate person in their way. You get two variants, one with assault bolters. Basically, he's wielding two heavy bolters in either arm, or he can have two plasma guns. Thanks to his reinforced servo-equipped boot plates, he's also able to survive the landing from low orbit without, breaking his legs. These guys are not so much like the Assault Marines in that they are there to get stuck into close combat. You drop these guys and you just shoot the enemy to pieces. The idea being that you don't have to get in close combat because you will be firing your gun all the way down. And in this, they are actually tactically very useful because essentially you're pouring very heavy firepower down on both troops and tanks with the maneuverability of an Assault Marine. Some have adapted to this tactic better than others. And there's even a lighter version with the Vanguard Primaris Marine, the Suppressor. The idea being that these are stealth jump pack Marines, armed with what is essentially a accelerator autocannon, a anti-tank and anti-infantry heavy weapon. Really good at killing any tough infantry, but can also take on most light tanks. And this ability to have really, really heavy guns on really maneuverable mounted platforms, such as the Gravis armor or the lighter Omnis pattern armor, which is what the Suppressors use, means that Primaris Marines can carry very heavy guns and maneuver as quickly as Assault Marines. So whilst your individual squads do not possess the utility of the traditional Tactical Marine, or vice versa, you still have got a lot of heavy firepower. which is maneuverable enough so that it can get to wherever you need it ASAP, which is the trade-off. Speaking of heavy firepower, we've got more coming in, the Hellblaster Squad. These things are, frankly, they're evil. They really are. They are possibly one of the best Primaris Marine units. Essentially, it is a squad armed with a heavy plasma cannon, except it is a more advanced version. This plasma cannon, of sorts, can be fired in different modes, allowing it to be more useful depending on what target you're shooting at. And the fact that you can have squads of them makes them truly terrifying. And these guns are easily capable of stopping pretty much anything. We're talking about Imperial Knights or Titans that have any real chance of not caring about these things against, tanks, beasts, troops, fortifications. Oh, these guns are evil. They will chew through units quite happily. So if you have 2 squads of these mounted on a hill and pointing down at some unfortunate person, you have a very solid firing line. And I think that is how Primaris Marines are able to compete. They have very heavy guns that are now both maneuverable and mobile enough to be transported quickly. Essentially, the Primaris Hellblaster Squad has doubled down on the Devastator Squad, essentially taking away the tactical utility but giving you overwhelming firepower instead. But enough with heavy guns. I'm sorry, I almost forgot. Primaris Marines don't believe in not having heavy guns. And to point this out quite bluntly, we're going to look at their aggressors. They're equivalent of Terminators of a sort. Although they do not possess the invulnerable save that a Terminator does thanks to the Crux Terminatus, these Primaris Marines in the Gravis pattern armour are essentially deployed to plug up gun lines and spearhead attacks. Yes, their guns don't have as long range as your crazy Hellblasters or your Suppressors or Inceptors, but they make up for that by the sheer volume of bullets and fire. You have 2 flavours. You have one which has the Bolt Storm gauntlets and lovely little Frag Storm rocket launchers on its back, or you have the Twin Flame Gauntlet variant. Salamander players were so happy when they saw this thing. And they are very tough. Gravis Armour Primaris Marines are almost as tough as Terminators, in that they have probably more advanced armour without the invulnerable save. So really heavy guns will make these things disappear eventually, but it's going to take some time. You use aggressors to basically make anyone who was foolish enough to think that they had a chance of busting through the line really regret their decision. They tend to come in very small squads, usually 3 to 5, but they are well worth their weight in salt. Or power armour in this instance, I suppose. And it's not as though aggressors can't fulfill a very similar role to Terminators. Like I said, they will struggle against things with bigger guns than them, and their range isn't as good, but stick some of these down tight corridors, and they don't even have to aim. They just have to point their guns, and that's kind of the point. They are meant for short, close quarters firefights, and that's what makes them perfect. The main issue really with Primaris Marines thus far has been their transport. Whilst you can move heavy guns around relatively quickly if you take Suppressors and Inceptors, you struggle with your more foot-slogging troops because the Primaris Marine only has really 2 options. He has the Impulsor being a new model that will be coming out soon that will be able to deliver your Primaris Marines a cheaper, lighter version, essentially a Rhino with the ability to hover, or Repulsor, the current much heavier armoured transport, essentially the Land Raider equivalent for Primaris Marines. And the Impulsor is, well, we're still waiting for that to come out. But once that is out, it will mean that Primaris armies will have the mobility they have lacked for such a long time, moving troops around more quickly with more protection, which will change the game a bit, because Primaris Marines up until this point, their main weakness has been their speed, and with bikes, that strange crime against nature that is the buggy, and with transports coming out that can transport greater capacities, this is where things are going to get interesting. In terms of the lore, if you're a Primaris Marine, you more or less get put into one of these units. There isn't an elite Primaris unit until you start going into the Honor Guard and upper echelons of a chapter. So you'll spend your time in one of these companies and then eventually move up to the first company, where you will be one of the Honor Guard, or company veterans, the Ancients who carry the banner, or lieutenants, and captains. And as are coming out soon, the Sword Guard are one of your options. I'm sorry for the briefness of Primaris Marines. It's not that there isn't interesting things about them, it's just that right now, because they're still relatively new, each chapter kind of uses them in very different ways. And because there are mostly chapters that are mixed, with some Primaris and keeping some of the traditional Battle Brothers around, the command structure is a little strange. It's still being adapted to fit in with both, although I guess it does also allow everyone to make their own unique take on it. Anywho, I hope you've enjoyed part 3. I'm going to stop it at this point, because I feel that characters, lieutenants and captains, and their chapter masters deserve their own mentions, as well as the kinds of armour and cool kit that they can wield. I hope you all have a great weekend wherever you are. Like and subscribe, and thank you so much to all my new subscribers. It's really boosted me. I really appreciate all the great feedback I've been getting from you all. Yeah, just keep spreading the word, people. I look forward to talking to you all soon. Take care.